3 winters ago, Lucian Vale signed a shipping order that sent the only woman he ever loved onto a ferry that burned before sunrise. Tonight she walked back into his engagement gala wearing black gloves and a smile sharp enough to cut through $10 million worth of crystal. Not to forgive him, not to beg him, not even to save herself. She came back to drag the truth into the light and make everyone in the room choke on it. If you believe betrayal should cost more than an apology, subscribe right now. Because this story is for anyone who has ever been lied to by someone who called it protection. And only cowards, schemers, and people who profit from other people's grief would scroll away before the end. Stay with me. Because before this night is over, one empire will collapse, one family name will rot in public, and one man will learn that the dead are not nearly as dangerous as the people who bury them too early. Grief does just live in your chest. It colonizes rooms. It settles into curtains, wood-old leather, unfinished drinks, the backs of closets, the corners of staircases, and the particular silence of a home where a voice used to echo. Lucian Vale had learned that the hard way. For 3 years, he lived in a penthouse above Port Meridian Harbor, surrounded by glass walls, imported art, and enough square footage to house 6 honest families. But no matter how often the house staff opened windows, changed flowers, replaced rugs, or polished the long black dining table that almost never seated more than one person, the apartment still smelled faintly of cedar, salt, and smoke. Smoke that was there. Smoke from a ferry fire on the Grey Channel. Smoke from the night Mara Solis was supposed to have died. At first he thought the smell would disappear. Then he understood the truth. Some losses don't leave. They just become part of the architecture. Tonight the Hall of Tides smelled different. Tonight it smelled like champagne, orchids, polished marble, ocean water from the surrounding aquarium walls, and the cold metallic hint of armed men pretending to be part of the decor. Lucian stood on the central platform beneath the glass dome of Port Meridian's most expensive event venue and watched 600 of the city's most dangerous people pretend this was a celebration instead of a transaction. The Hall of Tides had been built to impress donors and intimidate rivals. A vast crescent of glass and steel arched over a sunken ballroom wrapped in living seawater exhibits. Schools of silver fish moved behind transparent walls. Slow shadows of stingrays passed above the ceiling canal like drifting omens. The whole place looked less like a gala venue and more like a cathedral built by rich people who worshipped control. Which, Lucian thought, was probably accurate. To his left stood Celeste Arden, his bride-to-be in everything but the legal wording. She wore a fitted ivory gown with a neckline that suggested elegance and a posture that suggested negotiation. The Arden family ran freight, customs brokerage, and half the labor unions that didn't officially exist. The Vales controlled docks, warehousing, and most of the men who made problems disappear before sunrise. Their engagement was being sold to the city as a peace offering and to their enemies as a warning. Lucian and Celeste had never once used the word love. That was one of the reasons they got along. She caught him looking at the crowd and gave him a small, disciplined smile. "If you glare any harder," she murmured without moving her lips, "the donors will assume you know what's in their tax records." "I probably do." "Well, that's not comforting." "Neither is this." "Agreed." Ahead of them, a string quartet played something expensive and forgettable. Behind them, a 12-foot digital projection displayed the new Alliance crest, VL Varden Maritim Consortium. Gold letters. Blue-black sea background. A brand new future polished smooth enough to hide the blood under it. Lucian's father would have approved of the symbolism, if he were still healthy enough to stand. But Elias Vale had suffered 2 strokes in 14 months, and his world had shrunk to a private medical floor, nurses who spoke in careful tones, and brief moments of lucidity that vanished before Lucian could ask the questions that mattered. So the family's public face tonight belonged not to the old king, and not even entirely to his son. It belonged to Seraphine Vale. Lucian's aunt stood at the edge of the platform in a dark sapphire gown, one hand resting lightly on the head of a silver cane she did not need but wore anyway, because people tended to underestimate women who looked decorative and walked as if time belonged to them. That was their mistake. Seraphine had spent 25 years as the invisible mathematics behind the Vale Empire. She handled courts, brokers, shell companies, debt leverage, port inspectors, and strategic disappearances of paperwork. Men twice her size and 3 times her ego had underestimated her and found themselves without contracts, without allies, or without enough warning to run. To the city, she was Lucian's elegant aunt. To people who knew better, she was the reason the Vales had survived every war that should have broken them. She lifted her glass toward him now, calm as moonlight. Lucian nodded back because that was what a dutiful heir did. But there was a heaviness in him tonight, something older than the alliance and colder than doubt. A ceremony like this required witnesses, signatures, cameras, music, smiles, and the appearance of certainty. Lucian had the clothing for certainty, the expression for it, the training for it, but not the feeling. He had learned years ago that the most useful face in criminal politics was rage or charm. It was composure. Composure convinced enemies you knew more than you did. Composure made allies relax at the exact wrong time. Composure let a grieving man stand in front of 600 sharks and look like he'd never drowned a day in his life. The MC began speaking about renewal, legacy, and cooperation between historic maritime families. Lucian barely listened. His eyes moved over the crowd in the lazy, detached sweep of a man cataloging exits, body language, grudges, and weapons. Union bosses, judges, council members, insurance directors, shipping magnates, smugglers who had gone legitimate on paper and remained interesting in practice. A bishop whose charity arm routinely laundered other people's consciences. Every person in the room wanted something. Every person in the room feared someone. And every person in the room would applaud the alliance if they believed it kept the harbor profitable. That was Port Meridian, a city that did care what stained your hands as long as ships kept moving. The MC invited Lucian forward. He stepped to the microphone and the room softened into silence. "Thank you for being here," he said. The voice that came out of him was steady, low, and controlled. The voice of a man born around closed doors and taught from childhood that every sentence had two audiences, the one in front of you and the one waiting to use it later. The night is not about spectacle. It's about stability. The harbor has spent too many years losing money to old wars, smaller grudges, and the kind of short-term thinking that mistakes noise for power. That ends here. A few heads dipped. A few glasses rose. He continued. LaVale and Arden families were not built by accident. We were built by endurance, by discipline, and by understanding that a city survives when the people who move it stop confusing pride with leadership. A ripple of approval. He could almost hear Seraphine smiling. Celeste stepped beside him for the joint announcement, and for one brief second he considered the life opening in front of him. Predictable dinners. Strategic children. Shared board seats. A cold, useful partnership. A future free of chaos, if not warmth. A future that required one thing above all else, forgetting the woman whose laugh used to make him reckless. The woman whose handwriting still existed inside one book in his study, because he had not been able to burn it. The woman whose death he had blamed on himself every night for 3 years. Tonight, Celeste said clearly, we ask the city to witness not just an alliance between families, but the beginning of a different era for Port Meridian. The glass doors at the north entrance opened, not dramatically, not with thunder, not with screaming. They simply parted, and a woman walked in. Everything in Lucian went still. She wore a black column dress beneath a rain-dark coat, the fabric damp at the hem as if she had walked through weather on purpose. Her hair, once copper in sunlight and nearly black indoors, was pinned back carelessly enough to suggest she had better things to do than impress rich criminals. One small scar marked the line below her left ear. Lucian knew that scar. He had kissed that scar. He had once touched that scar in bed and listened to her tell the story of a childhood bicycle crash and a mother who stitched better than doctors. The room changed before anyone made a sound. It was the way prey changes when a wolf enters a field. Conversation died. Breathing sharpened. 600 pairs of eyes turned. Lucian stared as his mind made every stupid, desperate attempt to protect itself. Someone who looked like her. A cruel joke. A professional impersonator. A hallucination brought on by too much caffeine, too little sleep, and 3 years of unresolved guilt. But hallucinations don't drip rainwater onto marble. Hallucinations don't lock eyes with you from across a ballroom and look not shocked, not grieving but furious enough to be patient. Mara Solis stopped at the edge of the platform. The string quartet faltered into silence. No one moved. No one understood, which made the first words out of her mouth land harder than any gunshot. "Don't sign anything," she said. Lucian forgot the microphone. Forgot Celeste. Forgot the room. Forgot how a heart can keep working when the world has already split in half. "Mara," he said. Her gaze did not soften. "Well, that's still my name," she replied. Nice to know one thing survived. Beside him, Celeste inhaled sharply. Around them the guests erupted into whispers so fast and so dense they seemed to alter the temperature of the air. Seraphine Vale did not gasp, did not stagger, did not show surprise. She only set down her champagne flute with precise fingers and turned her face toward the nearest head of security. That movement, small, efficient private, was the first real proof Lucian saw, and because he saw it, some ancient animal part of him understood two truths at once. Mara was alive, and somebody powerful had known long before he did. Lucian stepped down from the platform. No one tried to stop him. He moved toward Mara slowly, like approaching a miracle that might bite. Up close, the details hit him hardest. The slight hollow beneath her cheekbones, the scar tissue at her wrist, the tension in her shoulders, the fact that she looked like someone who had survived rather than someone who had returned. "How?" he asked, and hated how thin the word sounded. "You want the short version or the honest one?" "Well, the honest one." "You'd honest one. You don't have time for it." That old heat sparked through him despite everything. Mara had always been capable of sounding irritated and intimate in the same sentence. His voice dropped. "Why buried you?" No, she said. "You buried what they told you was me." The room sucked in a collective breath. Lucian felt it in his spine. He would later remember 100 tiny details from that moment. The faint hum of the aquarium filtration system, the click of somebody's cufflink hitting a glass, the sound of his own pulse surging into his ears. But what stayed with him most was Seraphine's face. Still composed, still cold, still watching. Mara followed his gaze only briefly. Then she said, very quietly, "If you want to stay alive long enough to hear the rest, don't look at your aunt again." That sentence reached the deepest, oldest instincts Lucian owned. His face did not change. His body did. Every muscle along his back tightened. Every room exit recalculated itself in his mind. Every guard position became a problem. "Lucian," Celeste said from behind him, voice steady but strained, "Who is this?" Mara answered before he could. "I am the woman your future in-laws tried to drown." The ballroom shattered into noise. Questions, gasps, denials, angry barks, phones coming up, security shifting, donors whispering to aides, aides whispering to bodyguards, bodyguards touching earpieces. Lucian took one step closer to Mara. Her perfume was different, lighter, citrus instead of amber. But beneath it, there she was, salt ink, late-night stubbornness. Real. Too real. He wanted to touch her face and prove to every corner of himself that this wasn't some exquisite new way to be tortured. He didn't, because Mara was looking past him now, toward the east balcony, toward the sniper's line. "Down," she snapped. Lucian moved before he consciously understood why. He drove Mara sideways as a suppressed shot cracked through the glass behind them, exploding a champagne tower and sending shards and screaming guests across the marble floor. Panic didn't spread. It detonated. People dove, ran, shoved, grabbed spouses, yelled for exits, yelled for phones, yelled at the wrong people. The quartet vanished under chairs. 2 senators dropped to the floor with surprising athleticism. One shipping boss climbed behind a sculpture he'd donated himself. Lucian rolled with Mara behind a low stone planter as a second shot shattered the digital projection screen above the platform. Celeste was dragged behind the stage by 2 of her security people. Seraphine remained standing for exactly 1 beat too long, issuing calm instructions into the storm, before ducking as if remembering etiquette required it. Lucian looked at Mara. "Your timing," he said, breathless, "still needs work." Her eyes flashed. "My apology package got lost in the fire." Another shot bit marble near his shoulder. That was enough. He drew the compact pistol from the holster sewn under his jacket, and the muscle memory felt offensive in formal wear but reassuring in practice. Mara saw it and nodded once. "Good. At least grief didn't make you harmless. It made me unpleasant." Wolf. That part was already there. Despite the shooting, despite the chaos, despite the fact that her being alive had just rearranged the architecture of his soul, something in him nearly laughed. He swallowed it. "No riddles," he said. "Tell me what this is. Tell me what this is." Mara reached into the lining of her coat and produced a slim black data key no bigger than a cigarette lighter. "This is why I died publicly." Lucian stared. "Explain." We'll explain. Not here. No. No. Her jaw tightened. 3 years ago, the Grey Channel ferry fire was not an accident. The manifest you signed was altered before it reached you. The cargo below deck was machinery. It was a document vault. Backup drives and payment ledgers tying half this room to off-book custom seizures, labor murders, election money, and a port redevelopment scheme that would have handed the entire harbor to 3 private interests. Lucian's mind caught on one part first. The manifest was altered? Yes. By who? By who? A third shot struck the planter, spitting stone dust across his face. Mara leaned in until her forehead nearly touched his. Your aunt, she said. And Celeste, his father. Maybe others, but Seraphine is the spine. She let you believe you sent me to my death because guilt is easier to manage than suspicion. The world did not tilt. It clarified. Every oddity of the last 3 years rearranged itself into meaning. Seraphine handling the post-fire investigations. Seraphine discouraging independent audits. Seraphine guiding him toward an alliance with the Ardens faster than even politics required. Seraphine telling him, in her soft, merciless way, that mourning was natural but obsession was inefficient. He had thought she was protecting him from collapse. He now saw the cleaner truth. She had been protecting a lie. A team of guards in event blacks moved through the smoke and overturned tables with suspicious precision. Not toward the exits. Toward Mara. They were closing on us, Lucian said. Lucian said. They know I brought proof. How many copies? Enough to ruin people. Not enough to ruin people. Not enough if I die before it opens. Where? Where? The control spine for the building. Broadcast booth, donor server's internal guest network. If I can inject the file into the Gala system, every tablet, every wall screen, every secure attendee device mirrors it. They can bury it if the whole room receives it at once. Lucian risked a glance. Above the ballroom, tucked into the northwest mezzanine, he saw the control booth behind smoked glass. Too far across open ground. Too exposed. Too obvious. Other service route through the pelagic corridor, he said. Maintenance stairs behind the reef exhibit. Mara blinked once. Mar, you still map buildings by escape lines. Moi own the building. Yeah, do you? Not hit harder than the gunfire. He took it anyway. Move. Vove. They broke from cover together. Lucian fired twice toward the balcony, not expecting to hit the shooter so much as by confusion. Mara went low and fast beside him, weaving through wrecked tables, fallen floral stands, and men in $1,000 suits trying to decide whether dignity or survival mattered more. The answer, as always, was survival. They reached the coral exhibit wall just as 2 armed security contractors cut across from the west stairs. Lucian saw their lapel pins and understood the problem immediately. Not his people. Arden contractors. Privately swapped into the venue for the ceremony under joint event protocols. Of course. One raised a weapon. Celeste's voice rang out from behind the stage. Stand down. The man hesitated. Just enough. Mara hurled a serving tray into his wrist. The gun spun away. Lucian drove the second man into a pillar with his shoulder, disarmed him, and slammed his head against the marble before the guy could recover. He turned. Celeste stood half-shadowed behind a curtain, one heel missing, face, pale hair coming loose, fury making her beautiful in a way the gown never had. 3 of her personal guards clustered behind her, equally uncertain whom they served now. What the hell is happening? She demanded. Lucian could have lied. Old Lucian might have. New circumstances had no patience for that. Your father and my aunt may have built this alliance on fraud and murder. Celeste stared at Mara. Mara stared back. There was no softness in either woman. Only assessment. Convenient accusation, Celeste said. Mara lifted the data key. I brought receipts. A hard, ugly silence. Lucian expected outrage. What he got instead was something colder and smarter. Celeste looked over the ballroom at the movement pattern of the guards, then at Seraphine, then at where the shooters were concentrating. And she understood. Not everything, but enough. My father moved my security detail 2 hours before the gala, she said quietly. I thought it was optics. What? It was, Mara replied. Just not the kind you mean. Another burst of gunfire chewed into the stair rail above them. Celeste swore in a manner that would have shocked society pages and impressed dock workers. Fine, she snapped. Well, I'm not dying for anybody's merger. She turned to one of her guards. Take the west exits and create noise. Make them think I am headed for the garage. If my father gives an order, stall him. The guard hesitated. Now. He went. Celeste looked back to Lucian. If this is true, and if you are not currently staging the most elaborate public humiliation in city history, then the fastest route to the control booth is sealed. Will know another? Everyone rich enough to donate tonight was promised a private walk through the upper current tunnel after the ceremony. There's a service hatch behind the lionfish tank, hidden, ugly, and not on public schematics. Mara almost smiled. I like her now. Don't get attached, Celeste said. Together they moved. Celeste said. Together they moved. The upper current tunnel was narrow, damp, and lit by maintenance strips too weak to flatter anyone. Water rolled beyond thick acrylic panels on one side, filling the corridor with moving blue light, and the slow ancient shapes of sharks drifting overhead like thoughts too large to name. The glamour of the gala vanished down there. No flowers, no gold light, no speeches, just concrete, salt-exposed pipes, and the truth about every beautiful machine somewhere behind the facade. Somebody has to keep the engines from rotting. Lucian led, gun up. Mara behind him. Celeste last, barefoot now carrying a dropped sidearm with the uncomfortable competence of a woman whose family background had included more than charity luncheons. For 20 seconds, nobody spoke. Then Mara said, "Did you visit the grave?" The question almost stopped him. He kept moving. Every month. Why? He laughed. Why? He laughed once, bitter and breathless. That's what you ask me while people are trying to kill us? It matters. Everything about her voice said she already knew it mattered to him, too. I visited, he said, because if I didn't, then it meant I could survive you. And I hated the idea that I might. Silence. Behind them, Celeste looked away as if she had stepped accidentally into a confession not meant for her. Mara's voice lowered. I was alive the first time you went. He stumbled. Not physically, internally. That sentence struck places in him he had kept padlocked. What? What? They moved me before the coroner saw the body they used. I came out of the water with a fractured rib, burns down one arm, and just enough bad luck to be found by the wrong rescue crew first. Not government. Not saints. Men paid to retrieve the drives. Men who thought I'd die anyway. I escaped 2 nights later. He turned his head just enough to see her in profile. And you never sent word? And you never sent word. I tried. There it was. The crack in her composure. Small but devastating. I got one message to an attorney in Blackwater. He disappeared. I tried through a union broker you used to trust. Dead within a week. After that, I understood what I was dealing with. Anyone who knew I was alive became a target, and the person they watched closest was you. Lucian went cold. She kept speaking, maybe because if she stopped, she wouldn't continue. I spent a year crossing names, tracing transfers, rebuilding files from offshore backups and physical ledgers. The first time I found your aunt's signature pattern, I thought I was wrong. The second time I realized I was. The third time I nearly put a bullet in her myself. You should have called me. You should have called me. And said what? Mara shot back. Hello. Lucian, sorry I missed the funeral. By the way, your family has a traitor and I have no proof you aren't part of it? Celeste let out a short, humorless breath. Fair. Lucian hated that it was fair. More than that, he hated how quickly he believed her. Not because he was blind, because the truth fit. He had always thought grief made him stupid. Now he saw the sharper cruelty. It had made him obedient. The corridor opened at a junction where pipes climbed into the ceiling and a maintenance ladder led toward the upper control levels. Voices above. Bootsteps. Lucian signaled halt. Through the metal grating overhead, he heard one man say, "Booth is priority. Lady Vale wants the north side locked down before the external feed comes back." Another replied, "And Solace? Molev only if it does slow us down." Mara looked at Lucian. No triumph, no triumph. No, I told you so. Only the grim exhaustion of a woman who had spent too long being right alone. He mouthed, "Up fast." They climbed. At the top hatch, Lucian eased the latch and shoved hard. The first guard went backward in surprise. Mara hit the second with the butt of her borrowed pistol. Celeste kicked the hatch fully open and came up with all the controlled rage of a rich woman discovering the family business included her disposal. The fight lasted 9 seconds. One unconscious. One disarmed and zip-tied with a cable from the wall. One fleeing into the mezzanine and catching Lucian's warning shot close enough to decide elsewhere was healthier. The control booth doors stood 20 feet away across a narrow catwalk suspended above the ballroom. Below them, the gala had become a theater of damaged elegance. Guests clustered behind barriers, pillars, and banquet islands. The main lights flickered on emergency power. Screens flashed blue system errors. Security teams converged in conflicting patterns because half of them served the Veils. Half the Ardens, and a useful percentage served only whoever still looked solvent. At the center of it, Seraphine Veil stood beneath the Broken Alliance crest, speaking calmly to a shrinking circle of men who looked less like supporters by the second. She looked up, saw Lucian, saw Mara, saw Celeste. For the first time all night her face changed. Not much, a narrowing at the eyes, a tiny stillness at the mouth. Annoyance, not fear. That offended Lucian more than panic would have. It told him she still believed this could be solved. He started across the catwalk. A voice rose from below. "Lucian!" Gideon Arden, Celeste's father. Tall, silver-haired, handsome in the polished way of men who spent fortunes making ruthlessness look respectable. He stepped forward from the crowd with both palms slightly raised, a peacemaker's pose that would have fooled strangers and had once fooled investors. "Listen to me carefully," Gideon called. "Whatever that woman has told you, she is manipulating you. She disappeared after stealing sensitive material from multiple parties. She reappears on the night of a civic alliance, and suddenly there's violence. This is extortion dressed as grief." Mara leaned over the rail. "That's a lovely speech, Gideon. You should engrave it on the shell companies." Murmurs rippled. Gideon's face hardened. Celeste stared down at her father as if looking at a stranger through glass. "Dad," she said, voice carrying farther than she intended. "Tell me she is lying." He looked up at his daughter, and Lucian watched the precise second he decided which asset mattered more. Not truth. Not her. Control. "Come down from there, Celeste. Now." It was not an answer. Everyone heard that. Seraphine's voice cut cleanly through the noise. "Lucian, enough." The room quieted because when Seraphine Veil used that tone, people had historically lost the luxury of pretending they had options. "This spectacle ends now," she said. "You are grieving an old wound and being used by a woman who built her career selling information to men who confuse chaos with leverage." Mara laughed once. "You sold information, Seraphine. You sold cities. Cities are always for sale." There it was. Not confession exactly, but philosophy. Sometimes that's worse. Lucian kept walking toward the booth. Seraphine's gaze pinned him. "I held your family together," she said, "while your father softened, while unions tested us, while judges asked for more each season, while smugglers tried to carve up our docks. I made hard decisions because sentiment does not build harbors." Lucian stopped at the booth door. Turned. "And murder does?" "If it prevents larger losses." "Yes." The hall went silent enough to hear filtration pumps somewhere behind the walls. Gideon shut his eyes for a moment, as if furious she had said the quiet part aloud. Seraphine didn't care. She had spent too many years being right in rooms full of weak men to start apologizing now. "You think like children," she continued. "One in love with an illusion, the other in love with fairness. There is no fairness in infrastructure. There is only continuity. I ensured it." Mara's voice went flat. "By burning the Gray Channel ferry. By removing unstable variables," Seraphine corrected. Lucian felt something in him freeze hard enough to ring. Mara was not a variable. She was a breach. "She was a breach," Seraphine said. "And you were becoming one." The sentence didn't hurt because he expected mercy from her. It hurt because some broken part of him still had. He opened the booth door. Inside, the control room glowed with emergency screens, lighting boards, camera feeds, donor registry, building network projection control, live event stream. A technician lay handcuffed on the floor near a console, blinking rapidly but otherwise unharmed. Mara rushed to the central terminal. Lucian hauled the technician upright and cut his restraints. "Can you run?" he asked. The man nodded wildly. "Then disappear." The technician disappeared. Mara plugged in the data key and began working. Password fields, encryption windows, mirroring options, guest network protocols. Her hands moved faster than he remembered and steadier than he felt. "How long?" Lucian asked. "It depends if your aunt's been paying competent saboteurs." "Assume yes. Be within 3 minutes if the internal routers still answer." Celeste moved to another station, scanning system layouts. "There's an external live stream cache," she said. "If we push to the donor feed and the city archive at once, copies propagate outside the building before anyone can hard-kill local power." Mara looked over. "You read network maps?" Celeste gave her a deadpan look. "My father raised me to inherit a commercial empire, not organize flower arrangements." "Again," Mara said. "I like her." Lucian stood at the door, watching the ballroom through smoked glass. Seraphine had not fled. That worried him more than if she had. A woman like her only stayed visible when she still possessed a final move. "You always told me fear was wasted effort," he said quietly, without turning. Seraphine heard him through the open comm speaker tied into the booth system. "Why did?" "Well, you were wrong." "No, I was misquoted. Fear is useful when other people feel it." "Oh, you made me grieve her." "Mo made you govern." Lucian almost smiled at the obscenity of that logic. "Same thing to you?" "Her grief narrows a man. Narrow men become efficient." Mara's hands did not stop moving, but Lucian saw the fury that sharpened her shoulders. That's what I was to you?" he asked. "A training exercise?" "So, to me?" Seraphine's voice softened, and that nearly made it crueler. "You were a boy standing in front of a floodgate. I turned you into someone who could survive the water." "By drowning everyone else?" "If necessary." Below, Gideon was quietly backing toward a side exit. Celeste saw it in a camera feed and swore. "He's leaving." Lucian keyed the booth mic live to the hall. "Lock the south doors. Lock the south doors." The command rippled through his own people by reflex before they remembered there were disputed loyalties tonight. Still, enough men moved that the exit narrowed into a choke point. Gideon stopped. He looked up at Lucian with the offended arrogance of a man unused to hearing no from his own bloodline or anyone else. "Don't be stupid," Gideon called. "If that file opens, markets react by morning. Labor walks by noon. Labor walks by noon. Ports freeze. You think you were punishing us? You will punish the whole coastline." Mara did look up. "That's the defense every parasite uses when you pry it off." Seraphine's voice cut in. "Lucian, last chance. Walk away from the booth. Bring me the key. We contain the narrative, give the city a limited scandal, and salvage what matters." Lucian stared through the glass at the woman who had taught him chess, contract law table manners, and the practical value of silence. He thought of 3 birthdays she had attended with gifts picked too well. Of the time she had bandaged his hand after his first dogfight and told him pain was simply information. Of how she stood beside him at Mara's memorial in black silk and held his elbow while cameras photographed his ruin. Then he looked at Mara, alive, scarred, relentless breathing, and understood something with a simplicity almost childish. If love made him vulnerable, good. If grief had nearly destroyed him, good. At least those things meant he was human enough to lose. Seraphine, for all her brilliance, had solved that problem in herself long ago, and in doing so had hollowed out everything worth inheriting. "No," he said. It was only one word. It changed the room. Seraphine's chin lifted. "Then you are no longer acting as a veil." Lucian keyed the mic again. "Maybe for the first time," he said. "I am." Mara exhaled. "Upload package is primed. I need biometric authorization from the venue owner for full mirror release." Lucian pressed his palm to the scanner. Red line. Denied. He frowned. "Try again." Denied. Celeste leaned in, scanning the admin tree. Ownership privileges were reassigned this afternoon. To who? She turned the screen toward him. Executive Event Authorization Seraphine Vale. Of course. Mara said something creative and obscene under her breath. Seraphine's voice came over the booth speaker, smooth as cut glass. You should always read the event riders, Lucian. He closed his eyes for half a second, then opened them with a new calculation forming. Secondary overrides? Celeste scanned fast. Board emergency failsafe. Requires 3 principal family authorizations during threat events. Lucian looked at her. Mara looked at her. Celeste understood immediately what they were asking and let out a dry, incredulous laugh. You both have terrible timing. Will you do it? Lucian asked. She stared at him for one long beat. Not romantically. Not sentimentally. As someone deciding what kind of person she was when all the decorative language had been burned away. My father built my life like a merger term sheet, she said. If he added murder as a clause, I'd like to opt out. She slapped her palm to the second scanner. Accepted. 2 of 3. The third had to come from either Gideon Sayes, Seraphine. The odds worsened. Lucian was already turning back to the hall when Mara grabbed his sleeve. Done. If I get one of them to the panel, you want it. They'll shoot you or stall you. She looked past him, mind racing. Then, at the far edge of the booth, she saw an older console marked Foundation Override. Municipal Partnership ACSS. What is that? Celeste followed her eyes. The City Legacy Charter, she said slowly. When the hall was built, ownership was split for tax reasons between Vale Holdings, Arden Civic Development, and the Meridian Maritime Foundation. Lucian frowned. The foundation is ceremonial. Mostly. Who signs for it? Celeste hesitated, then smiled without humor. Tonight, the honorary chair. Mara blinked. Celeste pointed at the stage feed. Beneath the broken Alliance screen, ushered nervously by 2 event staff and utterly bewildered by the evening's turn, stood an 80-year-old retired dockmaster named Thomas Veer, invited solely to receive a legacy medal before the engagement toast. Lucian actually laughed. It came out wild and sharp. The city's most corrupt families are about to be destroyed by bookkeeping and an old Union sentimentalist. Mara's smile flashed for the first time that night. Perfect. Go get his thumbprint. Lucian moved. By the time he hit the catwalk, Seraphine understood what he was doing. Stop him. 2 remaining contractors sprinted from the west stairs. Lucian fired once, forced one behind a rail, and drove the other into the catwalk supports hard enough to send both men crashing into a lighting rig. The metal groaned. One chandelier dropped into the ruined champagne station below, showering the floor in crystal and sparks. The crowd scattered again. Lucian vaulted the last section of rail, hit the ballroom floor, and cut through overturned tables toward Thomas Veer. The old dockmaster stared at him with the expression of a man reconsidering retirement. Mr. Vale, he croaked, this is a remarkably bad ceremony. I need your hand. I beg your pardon? Faden? Foundation override. Now. Thomas looked at Seraphine, looked at Gideon, looked at the armed men, then at Mara up in the booth, a woman he had probably read dead in the papers 3 years ago. To his eternal credit, he didn't faint. He only said, Will this embarrass the council? Yes. Excellent. Lucian practically dragged him back toward the booth access lift. Halfway there, Seraphine stepped into his path. No guards, no theatrics, just her. That was somehow more frightening. She studied the old dockmaster, then Lucian. It does not have to end like this. Lucian almost pitied her, because she meant it. She truly believed there was still a version of reality in which she could negotiate after all this. Is that what you told yourself on the ferry? He asked. That it didn't have to end like that either? A flicker. Tiny. But he saw it. Regret? No. Not regret. Only irritation that history had become inefficient. Mara Solis would have destroyed operational continuity across 5 ports, Seraphine said. Labor unrest, customs seizures cascading insolvency. You killed people. Yeah. Prevented collapse. You chose yourself. That finally sharpened her voice. I chose survival. Your father mistook decency for strength. You mistook desire for judgment. Someone had to keep this family from becoming prey. Lucian stepped closer. I would rather be prey than become you. For the first time in his life, the words landed on Seraphine as a wound. Not because they were loud, because they were true. And because somewhere under the steel and strategy, part of her had still imagined he would one day understand her enough to forgive her. She moved then, fast, elegant, and without warning, producing a slim pistol from the line of her gown. Lucien was faster by inches only because he had finally stopped expecting family to hesitate. He struck her wrist. The gun fired into the ceiling canal. Water burst in a glittering spray above them. Guests screamed and scattered as blue-lit rivulets cascaded over the floor. Thomas Veer, proving unexpectedly useful, swung his commemorative metal plaque into Seraphine's shoulder with the righteous indignation of an underpaid working man. She staggered. Lucien kicked the gun away. For a second, aunt and nephew stood chest to chest amid seawater, broken orchids, and the wreck of old myths. Seraphine looked up at him, breathing hard. "You will drown in the world I kept from you," she said. "Maybe," he answered. "But it will be my world when I do." He took Thomas to the lift. Back in the booth, Mara slammed the foundation override open. Thomas pressed his thumb to the panel with a muttered, "I am absolutely writing an angry letter about this venue." Green confirmation. 3 authorizations accepted. Mara hit release. Every screen in the Hall of Tides flashed white, then black, then opened. Contracts, transfer trails, voice transcripts, insurance fraud shells, redacted Port Authority memos, payments from Arden Civic Development to ghost labor companies tied to forced dock clearances, internal veil memoranda signed by Seraphine rerouting hazardous shipments to trigger controlled losses later claimed as emergency consolidation grounds, a timeline of the Grey Channel ferry sabotage, photographs, bank hashes, call logs, names, so many names. 600 guest tablets buzzed at once. Phones lit. Secondary displays activated. The donor livestream cache pushed outward into the city archive. 3 financial blogs, 2 labor watchdogs, 1 federal tip server, and a mirrored dead men release Mara had hidden inside a charitable broadcast packet titled Harbor Unity Celebration. There was no speech after that. None was needed. A room full of experts in corruption had just been handed proof too specific to dismiss and too widely distributed to erase. The reaction spread in layers. First confusion. Then recognition. Then anger. Real anger. The kind that comes not from morals but from discovering you've been skimmed, lied to, leveraged, or placed at legal risk without consent. One smuggling financier shouted that his numbered account routing had been altered. A labor broker realized 3 murders blamed on a dock feud had been booked through an Arden redevelopment fund. A councilman began sweating through his collar as old votes resurfaced with payment timestamps. Gideon Arden tried to walk again. This time half the room watched him. Seraphine straightened slowly from where she had fallen, wet hair plastered to one cheek, and turned in a full circle as if taking inventory of a battlefield she no longer recognized. No one moved toward her. Not one ally. That, Lucien thought, was the real ending. Not handcuffs. Not sirens. Not a confession. Just absence. Power leaving the room like air from a punctured lung. Celeste stood at the booth glass with her arms folded, watching her father become a shrinking man in an expensive suit. "He taught me leverage," she said softly. "Turns out exposure is just leverage with daylight." Mara looked at her. "That's good. Keep that." Below them, the old city instincts kicked in, not rescue. Repositioning. Guests called lawyers. Assistants uploaded files to private backups. Rivals quietly traded glances that said, if this family falls, who gets what? And somewhere inside that frenzy, a more honest silence grew. The understanding that the old arrangement was over. Lucien keyed the hall audio one last time. "Everybody in this room has spent years pretending the harbor runs on loyalty," he said. "It does. It runs on fear, debt, and the hope that nobody checks the books. Tonight you got the books. No applause, no outrage, just stillness," he continued. "My aunt said cities are always for sale. Maybe. But if you bought this one through sabotage, extortion, and murder, then understand something clearly. Your receipts are public now." Gideon shouted up at him. "You sanctimonious idiot! You think regulators distinguish between guilty and adjacent? You burned every family here." Mara took the mic from Lucien. "No," she said. "You did. We just turned on the lights." That was the line that broke the room. Not emotionally. Operationally. Operationally. People started moving with purpose now, toward exits, toward phones, toward legal cover, toward whichever side seemed least radioactive. 3 heads of private security approached Seraphine but did not stand with her. They stood near her, a human grammar indicating detention before uniformed law ever arrived. She saw it. Lucian saw her see it. If she felt shame, she hid it beautifully. If she felt fury, she wore it like perfume. "You've made yourself weak," she called up to him. Lucian looked at Mara beside him, at Celeste on his other side, at old Thomas Veer still muttering about ruined retirement dinners, and found something in himself he had not felt in years. Not certainty. Better. Choice. "No," he said. "I just stopped confusing cruelty with strength." The first sirens arrived a minute later, thin at first then multiplying. Not the ornamental police presence rich galas hired for appearance. Not harbor patrol. Federal transit enforcement. Financial crimes response. Municipal investigators suddenly very eager to be photographed responding to a scandal they definitely hadn't ignored for years. Mara watched the external feeds confirm transmission success. "It's done," she said. Only then did she wobble. Just a little. Adrenaline leaving faster than pride could cover. Lucian caught her elbow. Her skin was warm, solid, alive. He almost forgot how to breathe again. She noticed. "Don't do that," she murmured. "Do what?" "Look at me like I'm going to vanish." He swallowed. "You already did that once." Something fragile crossed her face. Not guilt, not exactly. The bruise where guilt and love overlap. "I know." Below them, officers entered in tactical lines complicated immediately by the fact that half the people in the room could make career-ending phone calls. But evidence at scale has its own authority. Once the feeds started mirroring to federal nodes, even corrupt systems had to move like they believed in procedure. Gideon Arden tried charm first, then outrage, then legal threats. None landed. Celeste watched her father being boxed in by officials and whispered, "He always said image was liquidity." "No, tonight he's insolvent," Mara said. Seraphine did not protest when officers approached her. She only requested a dry coat. That, more than anything, felt like her. Lucian went down to the ballroom floor as they prepared to escort her out. People parted. Not respectfully. Cautiously. As if family tragedy might be contagious. Seraphine turned when he stopped in front of her. Up close, she looked older than she had an hour earlier. Not fragile, just finely visible beneath the performance. "They'll tear you apart," she said quietly. "The unions, the banks, the city board, foreign carriers. The moment they smell instability, they will carve the harbor into pieces." "Then I'll learn how to bleed properly." "That sounds like your father." He held her gaze. Good. A faint, strange smile touched her mouth. Not affection. Recognition. Perhaps that was all she had left to offer. "I did love this family," she said. Lucian believed that. It changed nothing. You loved owning it. The officers guided her away. She did not look back. Gideon came next, louder, uglier, stripped of polish by panic. He called Mara a liar. Celeste ungrateful, Lucian deranged, the regulators corrupt, the city unworthy. And the press vultures before one agent finally told him to save it for the arraignment. Celeste stepped into his path for 1 second. He stopped, perhaps because some habits survive even collapse. She looked at him not with tears, but with exhausted comprehension. "You could have told me what kind of man you were," she said. He tried. "I did this for our future." She almost smiled. "No," she said. "You did it because you couldn't imagine a future you didn't control." Then she moved aside and let them take him. By the time dawn started silvering the horizon beyond the harbor glass, the Hall of Tides had become what all luxury venues eventually become when enough truth is applied to them: a mess. Broken crystal. Wet marble. Abandoned heels. Blood drops from superficial wounds. Discarded invitations. Crumpled napkins worth more than most people's lunches. Flower arrangements collapsed into decorative grief. The media was already howling outside. Inside, staff moved with shell-shocked efficiency. Investigators photographed everything. Guests who had once been impossible to touch suddenly became very available for comment through counsel. Lucian found himself standing near the drained champagne station, staring at a single floating orchid petal turning in dirty water. Celeste approached barefoot, carrying her shoes in one hand and someone else's suit jacket around her shoulders. For what it's worth, she said. I never wanted to marry a man who looked like he'd rather be at his own execution. Lucien managed a tired breath that might have been a laugh. I'm sorry. So am I. So am I. She glanced toward Mara, speaking with federal agents across the room, but not for the same reasons. He waited. Celeste shifted her shoes. I knew my father was ruthless. I didn't know he was monstrous. Those are different budgets of sin. That line was so sharp he almost admired it. What happens to you now? He asked. She looked out through the cracked glass wall toward the waking city. Salvage what I can that isn't poison. Sell what is. Rename half of what remains. Donate enough money that newspapers invent the word reform. Maybe go to therapy out of spite. Ambitious. Wise and Arden. She hesitated, then added, She came back for you, you know. She came back for you, you know. Lucien's throat tightened. She came back for the truth. Celeste gave him a look usually reserved for slow children and stubborn men. No, those aren't mutually exclusive. Then she walked away into the dawn, and Lucien was left with the unbearable simplicity of that possibility. Mara was with 2 agents near the west doors, giving a statement in clipped, efficient sentences. The same competence that had once drawn him to her now cut him in a new way. He had loved her when she was witty, ferocious, half-impatient, and gloriously alive. He had never had to imagine what survival might sand off a person. He watched her sign a document, hand over one backup drive, keep another hidden until the agent insisted, then surrender that too with visible reluctance. When the officials finally released her, she came toward him slowly. For the first time since entering the hall, she seemed tired enough to admit it. You're bleeding, he said. You said. You're staring. You're staring. You're alive. Still true. He let out a breath he had apparently been storing for 3 years. I don't know what to do with that. What? That makes 2 of us. They stood amid the ruined gala as staff stripped linen off tables and investigators labeled evidence markers beside centerpieces. Romance had never looked less cinematic. Which, Lucien thought dimly, might be why this felt real. I went to your grave every month, he said. I know. His head jerked up. What? 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 What once? Once. The words landed softly and destroyed him anyway. Mara looked down at her hands. About 8 months after the fire. I couldn't risk approaching. I needed to know whether you had buried me or forgotten me. So I watched from across the cemetery road in a rental car while you stood there in the rain looking like the world had ended badly, and then continued out of spite. He closed his eyes. Why didn't you come to me then? Because you weren't to me then. Because you weren't alone. She lifted her gaze. Your aunt's driver stayed parked 2 rows behind you. Same vehicle on 3 separate visits. Same rotation with 2 different security men. She was measuring your grief, monitoring it. I realized then she didn't just know I was alive. She knew you did. Every answer somehow generated a fresh cut. Lucien rubbed a hand over his face. I signed that manifest. You signed what they put in front of you. I should have checked it. Yes, Mara said, not cruelly. You should have. Honesty from anyone else might have sounded like accusation. From her, it sounded like respect. He accepted it because he had no right not to. They moved to a quieter corner near the darkened tide pool exhibit. Outside the glass, the harbor was waking ferries crossing, cranes looming, gulls circling over water that reflected morning in broken silver sheets. For a long time, he said, I thought loving you made me careless. Mara leaned against the rail. And now? Now I think not loving anything would have made me easier to use. She looked at him for a long moment. That, she said softly, is the first intelligent thing you've said all night. He laughed despite himself. It hurt and helped at once. The next days moved with the unnatural speed of public scandal. By noon, 4 financial channels were calling it the Meridian Port Conspiracy. By evening, labor leaders demanded external oversight of every shipping contract signed under Vale Arden review in the last 5 years. By the second morning, 3 council members had resigned, 2 foreign carriers had frozen joint agreements, and the phrase structured criminal privatization had entered national headlines with all the elegance of a brick through stained glass. Seraphine refused a plea deal. Gideon tried to negotiate one and accidentally implicated 2 more men in the process. Elias Vale, during one clear afternoon in his medical suite, listened to the initial briefing in silence, then closed his eyes and whispered, "I always knew she loved power more than blood." Lucian stood there absorbing the old grief hidden inside that sentence and realized his father had probably seen more than illness allowed him to prevent. Mara moved into a secure apartment, under temporary federal protection, and hated every second of it. Lucian spent 3 days untangling emergency operations across the harbor, and another 3 learning how many of his signatures from the previous 3 years had been guided, edited, or cornered by Seraphine's architecture. The number was high enough to shame him and low enough to save him, which somehow felt worse. At the end of the first week, he found Mara on the roof of the protection apartment building at sunset, sitting on a utility box with her knees drawn up and a coffee gone cold in her hand. The city burned orange around them. Port Meridian looked almost innocent from that height, as if steel, water money, and hunger had accidentally made something beautiful. "You know this roof is probably illegal," Lucian said. "So arrest me." So arrest me." Busy season for that. She glanced at him. "You look terrible." "What?" "Thank you." "What?" "Well, thank you." "You're welcome." He sat beside her. For a while they watched tugboats drag the evening's labor across the channel. He did not reach for her. Not because he didn't want to, because after everything, wanting did not entitle him to touch. "I need you to hear this," he said finally. "If you decide that what happened between us is unsalvageable, I will live with it. Badly, but I will. I will still take down every structure they built, and I will still make sure no one ever uses your death again, real or fake." Mara turned the cold coffee cup in both hands. "I didn't come back for revenge alone." He waited. "I came back," she said, "because I spent 3 years telling myself the version of you I loved might have been a story I invented under stress. Then I saw the engagement announcement and thought, fine, maybe I was wrong, maybe he became exactly what they wanted. But if I was wrong, I wanted to be wrong to your face." "No, that seems harsh. Mars survived a ferry sabotage. My people's skills decline." He nodded, deservedly. "And what did you find?" She looked out at the harbor. "Well, I found a man wearing armor so long he thought it was skin." Her voice thinned at the edges. "And I found out I still hated the idea of leaving him in there." Something broke open in him at that. Not loudly, quietly. The way ice on a river cracks from underneath first. "I loved you," he said. He said, "I think I kept loving you so badly it turned into penance." Mara's mouth twitched. "But that sounds like you." "It was ugly. Love usually is when rich men try it." He laughed again, and this time she smiled enough for him to remember how survival hadn't taken everything. Weeks passed. Then months began to gather. The harbor did not collapse. That disappointed many cynical people and several private speculators. What happened instead was slower, messier, and therefore more miraculous audit committees. Independent inspectors. Joint labor oversight. Transparent cargo routing. 3 external firms on rotating review. Union representatives with actual access. A scandalized but necessary board, where enemies checked each other's ledgers because trust had finally become too expensive. Lucian spent more time in fluorescent conference rooms than private clubs. He learned that honest governance was less glamorous than criminal command and far more exhausting. He also learned how many people had stayed silent not because they were evil, but because systems train ordinary cowardice into professional etiquette. Mara refused permanent employment under him. Smart woman. Instead, she became an independent compliance architect for a consortium that several terrified shipping families formed after seeing what hidden ledgers could do to a bloodline. Celeste took over the legally salvageable part of Arden Logistics, sold off the rot and publicly funded dockworker injury claims her father's companies had buried for years. The newspapers called it image repair. The workers called it overdue. Both were true. Seraphine went to trial in a navy suit and pearl earrings, unrepentant and devastatingly articulate. When asked whether she regretted the decisions that led to the Grey Channel fire, she answered, "Regret is emotional bookkeeping for people who prefer confession to consequence." The line ran on front pages for a week. Lucian read it twice, folded the paper, and went back to work. One rainy evening nearly 4 months after the gala, he stood in his father's old office overlooking Pier 9. The portraits had changed. Gone were the oil paintings of dead men pretending not to enjoy power. In their place were maps, contracts, labor schedules, and a framed black-and-white photograph of the harbor during its first expansion 50 years earlier. Mara entered without knocking. She had started doing that again. He noticed the first time and pretended not to. Now he waited for it. "You're staring at spreadsheets like they insulted your mother," she said. "They insulted 3 generations of accounting." "Good. Good." She set 2 coffees on the desk and dropped into the chair opposite him like she had always belonged there and would continue belonging on her own terms. Rain tapped the window. Ships moved below like lit arteries. Lucian picked up the coffee. "Trial update?" "Our prosecution says Seraphine's appeal strategy is basically to argue that morality is economically illiterate." "That sounds like her." "It also sounds like a textbook written by a snake." He smiled. She studied him over the cup. "You sleep more now." "So I'm told." "So I'm told." "You still lock every door twice." "Well, I own a harbor." "Well, you also own trauma." "You also own trauma." "Joint venture?" "Unfortunately." The silence between them no longer felt like danger. That alone seemed revolutionary. Lucian leaned back in his chair. "There's something I've been meaning to say without a gunshot. Federal subpoena or collapsing chandelier in the background." "Well, that narrows the setting considerably." Serious." Mara's expression gentled. "I know." He set the cup down. "For 3 years I loved a ghost because it was easier than facing the life that remained. Then the ghost came back and turned out to be angrier, smarter, and significantly harder to romanticize. All compliment accepted. But what I feel now is different." He held her eyes. "Less worship. More choice. Less guilt. More fact. I know who you are when you're furious, exhausted, suspicious, impossible, and right. And if you let me, I would like to build something with that version of you. Not the dead one. Not the memory. You." Mara said nothing for a long moment. The harbor lights flickered across the glass behind him. Finally she rose, came around the desk, and perched against its edge beside him. "When I was hiding," she said softly, "I kept thinking about all the things I would say if I ever saw you again. Half of them were devastating. The other half were worse. But now that I'm here, what I know is this: I never needed you perfect. I needed you honest." Lucian looked up at her. And we're late," she said. "But you finally arrived." He laughed once, shakily. "That's merciful by your standards. Don't get used to it." He took her hand. Carefully. As if making an agreement with something sacred and temperamental. She led him. Outside, Port Meridian continued doing what great cities do best: profiting, rebuilding, forgetting selectively, and telling itself that this time the new order would be cleaner than the old one. Maybe it would. Maybe it would. Maybe it would. Cities don't become honest all at once. People don't either. But in an office once shaped by secret ledgers and inherited fear, 2 survivors sat with rain on the windows, warm coffee between them, and the wreckage of old lies finally behind instead of underneath. Lucian thought about the grave he had visited for 3 years. The stone. The flowers. The apologies whispered into wet air. He had once believed that was the shape of love: devotion to absence. He knew better now. Love was not kneeling in front of what was gone. Love was what happened after the doors blew open. After the file uploaded. After the family name cracked. After the city watched the wrong people fall. Love was not memory. It was return. It was evidence. It was the terrifying decision to remain reachable after betrayal has taught you every reason not to. Mara squeezed his hand once. "What? What?" "You're thinking too loudly," she said. "Occupational hazard." "Occupational hazard." "Mine too." He turned his chair slightly toward her. "And now?" She looked out over the harbor, then back at him. "Now we see whether a city built on leverage can survive a little truth." He glanced at the stacks of audit reports, legal reviews, and labor petitions covering the desk. "That sounds exhausting." She smiled. "Yes," she said. "But for once, exhausting might be better than dead." And for the first time in years, Lucian Vale smiled without forcing it. Not because the city was healed, Not because justice was clean. Not because the dead years could be recovered. But because the woman he had loved through smoke and memory was here in the room, alive enough to argue with him, stubborn enough to stay and real enough to ruin every lie he had mistaken for destiny. The harbor lights burned against the rain. Ships kept moving. Files kept opening. Names kept falling. And somewhere beneath the noise of reform, scandal, business, and grief, a quieter thing endured. Not innocence. Not redemption. Something harder. Something earned. The truth. And this time, it had teeth.